Cool. Fine. Enough people have requested recording this thing. Cool. So we're just going to start off making a server.js file. So what all do we need in a server.js file? So let's... All right. So fortunately, I have pre-built a lot of these things. All right. All right. So we're just getting Express. We're making an app. We're requiring paths so we can easily get references, and we have a listener running. Cool. All right. So in order to use Express, obviously, we need to actually have an Express module. So let's go ahead and make all those things. So npm init-y to kind of get our core init structure set up. And so notice this package.json just showed up. Bing. All right. Yeah.
In your JSON package there,
Yeah.
So start is node server.js. That's because you already pre-created that. It's
Yeah.
not, then you have to go and change
Yeah, exactly.
from index.
Correct. Yeah. And a lot of times people, yeah, the base one is just index.js. And if you have a main.js, it'll actually switch to main.js there too. Cool. All right, so npm install Express. Whoa, can't save. Okay. So our package.json should update itself. And there we go. So now we have this Express dependency. Cool. So at this point, we should be able to actually run our server and it should work. But that's not obviously all. Well, let's just do it. Nodemon server.js. Cool. All right. Up and running server. Yay. Cool. So now, and if you guys listen to my Django videos, I say cool a lot, so I apologize. Now, what else do we need?
Static.
Okay. Oops. Where is my Express static? Ah, fine.
Type it out.
Oh, man. I'm sure I have it, though. Let's just find it. That's routes. Fine. Oh, there's static files. Convenient. All right. So let's get some client ones. What other ones do we want? So for me, client, once I'm making these full mean things, are just, client is my static stuff. So once I'm using Angular, because Angular just basically uses all static files, you can just use static. You don't even need to have anything else. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so I tend to use Bower for my front-end dependencies. You can use NPM. It's totally fine. A lot of people are actually switching all the way over to NPM for all their components. So you can do like npm install jQuery. And that's totally fine. I like to keep them separated just because their package management is slightly different, and Bower was originally designed for front-end dependencies. But as things have kind of integrated, like React, which is actually kind of a front-end package that's running on the back end a lot of times, people have started just using NPM for everything. Again, totally fine. Either way works. But so I'm just initializing Bower. There's my Bower JSON file. Bower install. Angular, save, Bower install, Angular route, cool. And if these dependencies aren't quite the right version, Bower will actually identify what the right version is and solve them for you, which is one of the nice things about Bower. So if you have like trying to use a Angular package that requires like Angular 1.5.2 instead of 1.5.6 or 1.4, it'll actually backgrade everything for you, which can be awesome. It can also be a pain in the ass. I mean, sorry, that shouldn't be on the video. So, cool. All right, so now we have our Angular dependencies. Great. So if we have a client folder that we're going to try to look for stuff in, we should probably make a client folder. So new folder, client. And inside of client, let's just make ourselves an initial index.html. All right, and in index, whoops. Sorry, I've switched HTML. All right. All right, so if you have a static file in your server.js file and you have no routes, it will automatically go and look into your static folders and see if you can find an index.html file to run. So you'll notice that you don't have, a lot of times you don't see this route around because it's automatically generated for you. All right, so let's just see that in action. All right, so when we go to localhost, 8,000, we should see just hello world. And there's hello world for us. All right, cool. Oops. Sorry, this is me working on Django stuff. So there we go. That's looking pretty good so far. So what part do you guys want to build out first? Do you want to just do some quick Angular stuff, or do you want to do the server side stuff?
What's recommended?
Either way works. I didn't really like to do. That doesn't matter.
Server side.
Sure, let's do server side. Okay. Okay, so let's do server side first, and then we can type in the routes that we're going to hit and see what happens, and then we can connect those to Angular because we're going to just respond with JSON from the server side. All right, so I just modularized from the beginning. So new folder, let's call this server. Inside of server, let's make a couple new folders inside of that. Let's make config folder. And inside of config, what we're going to have is our routes and our connection to Mongoose. And then also we're going to have two other folders in here, which are going to be our models and our controllers. I don't know why Node's being weird, but there we go. All right. So config, let's just go ahead and make our config file. It's a new file called routes.js. All right, so now we have this in here. And express, we'll just go and build express routes. All right, so we're going to export this thing. And basically, I just made a whole bunch of RESTful routes. That's kind of my default. So basically, when we do an app.get, we're going to go and do something with this weird users object. We don't have a users object. We probably need to get a users object from somewhere. So, and that user object is obviously going to have an index, a new, a show, edit, create, update, and delete if we're going to do it this way. We don't have to build all those out today. Let's just build out, like, I don't know, 3 of them. So we'll do new, those 3.
Do you have support for click and delete without using method override?
Yes. Yeah. So what's that?
You already have support for click and delete without
So
requiring method override.
yes, Mongoose should be fine with put and delete. Yeah. Or express. Sorry. All right. So our user object. Well, we don't have a user object, but we're going to have one. So we're going to have var user equals something, and what that's going to be is it's eventually going to be a Mongoose model quote users. Man, we just created something new that we don't have, which we don't have Mongoose. So obviously we need to have a Mongoose as well. So var Mongoose equals require Mongoose.
You normally be doing that in a separate file?
These 2 things?
Oh, no, sorry. I'm ahead of myself.
Yeah, I mean this whole thing is a separate file, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of setting up the connection to the actual database.
Ah, yeah, so we'll do that next.
Okay.
Yeah, and that will also be a separate file. Yeah. Cool. All right, so we don't have these things yet. We haven't even created, we don't know what Mongoose is yet. So, but we know where we're going to get Mongoose from. So npm install Mongoose. So that's where we're going to get Mongoose from. This users model, well, we have to create a model to do that. All right. So do you guys want to, let's just do my normal pattern. New file, and we're going to call this thing, in the platform it's called Mongoose all the time, mongoose.js. Let's call this connection.js just to clarify what it actually is. And then this is the basic setup for it. So basically we say, hey, go get Mongoose from that npm installation. Go get fs, which is going to be the file service. Path, so we can easily use pathing, so path.join. Decide what our database is going to be named. Let's call it, what do we want to call this database? Users. All right, and then it says, hey, go into this guy, join all of our models from the file that's above this one. So go up and out of here and go over into this models folder right here. And so everything in there that ends with JS, load it. That's all that this code is saying. So it says connect to a user's database here, and then everything in here, run and load. Cool. All right, so looking fine so far. So now we can go ahead and make ourselves a new file in here. It doesn't matter what we named it because it's not looking, it's all it's looking for is a .js, but just for clarity, let's just call this user.js. All right. Again, I'm super lazy. All right, so we're going to require Mongoose. We're going to make a new schema. We're going to have our timestamps. We can have created that and updated that. And you don't have to rename them. You can create it as a camel case. It's totally fine. That's more JavaScript style. Just if you took the first stack, either, well, Python for everybody here, then the kind of the SQL-y way of writing this is underscore. And let's just have a name as our other piece and type equals string. And what else do we want to know about this thing? Do we want to have other pieces of it? Is it min length? Equals 5. I don't know. All right, so that's a pretty exciting.
Is that required?
Oh yeah, we could do required equals true. Sure.
Can you use the colons instead of the equal sign?
Yes. Thanks. As I said, I know I'm going to make, and this should be lowercase true. Cool.
So my question on your timestamps.
Yep.
Line 6. If you didn't have that.
Yeah.
Just you just had straight timestamps. It would just do created at no underscore.
Correct.
Updated at.
Yep.
You're just redefining.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened.
Yep. So I've just basically this allows us to rename these keys as this second key. So we could call this like, I don't know, made at, if we wanted to, you know, rename it something else. Oops. Cool. All right. So we need to say what our name of our model is going to be, and let's call it users. So Mongoose will automatically lowercase and plural it. So I just do it from the beginning. Just how I am. So basically what this line 8 here says is I'm going to load this users collection into my database. We can leave this thing schema name as long as these things match. That's totally fine. But we can call it user schema just to clarify what it's actually doing. But it's really just referring to whatever this variable is. So if that variable was schema or banana, doesn't matter. Okay. All right, so at this point, if we were to load this connection.js file, it would go and look in there, go and look in our models, and it would then run this code, and we would load users into our collection. It won't show up in our collection at this point, which is kind of interesting. So Mongoose won't actually create stuff until you actually load a piece of data into it. But it has the potential to do it. So right now it's kind of locally stored in side of Mongoose, but our Mongo database isn't actually connecting to it just yet. All right, so that's fine and dandy. Let's go into our controllers and make a new file in our controllers called users.js. All right, so in our users.js, well, obviously we need to go and get Mongoose again. So, and I'm just going to do it again the cheap way because I think it's really boring for you guys to watch me type. All right, so for our Mongoose, require Mongoose again. And whatever we want to call our model is fine. So let's call this user. And this model is going to be, quote, users. And I think I screwed up my initial routes, but that's okay. We'll fix that in a second. All right.
You need to initiate var user.
It is an initiation with var.
Oh.
It doesn't look like it, so it should be looking like that because of this comma. So actually, I'll just clarify that. So you can concatenate variable initiation using commas rather than writing semicolons between them. But this is the equivalent statement of doing that. All right. So this is going to be ugly. All right, so let's make ourselves a method in here. So let's get index. So index is going to be a function. Do I really want to do it this way? Whatever, doesn't matter. User.find function. And this takes request and response as its two parameters, right? So when we go and get this user module and whatever gets returned from this, which is this immediate function that's going to return an object, then we're going to be able to say, hey, the index function takes two parameters. It actually takes three. There's next in there too, but we're not defining it. Request and response. When we call this index method, we say, hey, user, go to the user model, which we've declared right here. Go and find everything. And it's going to take two other parameters, response and users. And then we could have bound this catch errors to it and done some other cool things, but which is why that's sitting there. But basically you say if error res.json, let's just send back a silly object that's something like error true. And then otherwise, res.json with all of our users. And I guess we should probably give that a key. Cool. So in theory, that should go and get all of our users if it actually worked. Does that make sense to everybody? Again, there's probably typos all written through here, but let's close that guy up. All right. That's fine. Cool. And because it's an object, let's throw a comma afterwards. So I tend to annotate this like end of index because if these things get larger, it can just be kind of a mess and it can be hard to figure out where your parentheses end. So just having a quick comment as to where the ends of those things are is useful. And if you leave off a comma, it does not like it. So, oh man, what am I doing? So Python requires your keys to be dictionary or keys to be strings, whereas JavaScript is a little bit more flexible. And in principle, you should actually use just symbols, which is the unprint. Don't use it as a string, just use a symbol. So sorry about that. Cool. All right, so that one's looking fine. Let's make a create method. Again, takes request and response. And so we can say user equals new user. And we can say like request.body. So basically whatever gets passed in as rec.body is going to populate our new user. And then we can say user.save and that takes a callback function that just has, I think we can send back user if we want to. And we can save our user, and that's fine and dandy. Now we can, was that?
Good question.
Yeah.
For saving, you did rec.body, so we don't need to do individual fields.
It depends on how you set your user up and what your rec.body is.
Okay.
So it will unpack what keys match, and if you have things that don't match or you want to build extra pieces into your user, like pre-save and do some other things, then you can't do that.
Okay.
But for a simple, basically this, you can pass in a dictionary, right, to user, and it will unpack it for you as long as you have the right keys. And so rec.body is just a dictionary. Sorry, an object, thank you. It's just an object, and so as long as it has the right keys, it should work out fine.
So the new keyword when you're using a schema will automatically match up keys and values.
Yep, so it goes, so it basically goes and looks at this model and sees, hey, is there the right key in here? And if so, then awesome. So if we don't have a name key, then it'll be like, well, because it's required, it's going to throw an error. But we can have extra keys, and it should be fine. When we try to save it, it will be like, well, I don't have those things in there. That's fine. I won't try to save over them because I don't have, my collection's not set up to do that. So, all right. And we can just do a quick test. So if there's an error, we'll respond with an error. And otherwise, we'll respond with the user. Sorry. And the user's already been defined here, so it should actually just be able to do that. Cool. All right, so that should be our create function and our index function. Now, in our routes, I also had a new. And new, all the ones that just show views are actually controlled by, in terms of RESTful routes, are just controlled by Angular. So we don't actually need to have a new route. Our Angular routes will pick that up for us. Okay. All right, so far so good. All right, so now in our server, so we've made these things, but our server doesn't actually have any access to them. And so we have a couple things that we've done. So we've said, well, one thing that we've done is rec.body. So how do we get access to pieces of our request.body? So params are one thing that will allow us to get access from our client side, but it won't be the body that gets passed over.
Body parser.
Yep. So npm install body parser. Oops, I didn't save that, but whatever, it's fine. All right, and so now we need to require body parser. So if we're going to actually use rec.body, then we actually have to make a variable for it. So there's our adding body parser. So we have to make sure that we do that after we've declared app, so that's fine. And extended equals true. Doesn't make too much difference for the stuff that we're doing. So it just is what type of Unicode encoding we're doing. So body parser, there it is. We're using it. Great. Cool. So now we should be able to access rec.body. Cool. All right. We also have to go and get our different routes, right? So we've created this routes file, but we actually haven't done anything with it. So we need to go and get those that routes file. So require, we don't have to set a variable to it. We just have to run it. So require the routes. And let's look at our routes really quickly. So notice routes is a function that gets passed a parameter, and it doesn't have to be a media function. That's not going to make a difference because we're not invoking it because we're going to pass it something. So we're passing it this function. So what gets returned here is this function that takes a parameter. So we basically have to say, hey, well, require from /server. So go adjacent to us into the server file, into config, and go get routes.js. And then at this point, if we like console log this, it's going to console log this function. So we need to invoke it passing it something. So let's just pass it app, because that's actually what this app here is, whatever gets passed to it. And we're going to say, well, app.get, and then that will actually do something, because this app here actually has get and post and put and patch and methods attached to it. So it can actually do this sort of thing, because we passed it in through there. All right. And again, I said something wrong about my user. It's not Mongoose model. It's the actual controller that we want to get, because just like these routes return this function, this controller, oops, is also returning this immediately invoked function, which is this object that has these things in it. So we actually want to get something from that controller. So going over to our routes, we want to say, well, let's require, and we want to go back up a full file structure. So we're going to go up and out, and then adjacent to it. So both these things should work for most people, but if you do // and then, so now we're outside of it. So we went from here, up out of config, and so now we want to go down into controller. And then we want to go and get users.js. So this one we do not have to invoke, because it's an immediate function that's all the way invoked. So that last set of parentheses says, as soon as you see this thing, run it. You know, if we left these things off here, then we'd have to invoke it here.
Does it throw an error if you invoke it twice?
Yes, because it won't. You can't, unless it was a closure that actually had the ability to be invoked twice, like meaning you returned a function at the end that was something that you could invoke. Then you could do that, which you can do. What's that called? Yes, thank you.
What is it called?
Currying. So you can curry functions. There's that brief little chapter in there. But in general, we aren't going to do that. Well, at least for this stuff. So. All right. And one of the reasons that you saw me kind of questioning about how I wanted to set this up initially, generally what I will do is actually I'll write my function up here as my object, and then module export just the invoked version of it down here, just to make it cleaner, so I know exactly what I'm exporting. So I'd have something like function users, and then just write all that code there, and then just be like users, or new users actually. So, but whatever. Okay, so now this thing should be the right thing, so this should be the right object. All right, so that's looking okay. So the other thing that we haven't done from our server file is we haven't actually run this connection and made this connection file. So we have to do that as well. And we need to do this before we run this app, because otherwise this user model won't be registered. So /server/config/ connection.js. All right, so let's see what happens when you try to run this thing. How many errors do you guys think I'm going to get? Really? Gary has confidence in me. Okay, good. All right, so let's look at what the error is. All right, so my routing path of /controller users.js.
Controllers.
Yep. All right, so that's going to be in our routes.js file. Should be controllers. And all right, so we still have an error there. All right, users is not defined, and I said users, so there's that. All right, so now we're getting this next tick error. How many people have seen this next tick error?
Mongo is not running.
Yep, exactly. So, right, so it's trying to connect to Mongo at 27017. So this Mongo is just another server that's up and running. So we have to make sure that we're actually having Mongo up and running. I'm going to run it from my normal terminal, because if you run it from Atom's terminal, it doesn't stop itself correctly when you quit Atom. So. All right. So now that next tick error should be gone when you restart Mongo up here. Cool. All right. So just to kind of re-emphasize that, let's go to this route and see what happens. All right, so that's the response you're going to get if you go to that actual server. So just like port 8000 or 9000 or 5000 or whatever port you're going to, this is just another port. It's a server that's up and running on your machine. You can try to go to it. It doesn't like it, but that's all it's doing. Cool. All right, let's make sure Hello World's still showing. Perfect. All right, so let's try and go and hit one of those routes. So let's go to users. Oh, look, there are users. It returned a JSON object that's empty with a key of users, which is what we expected. We said, hey, respond with all of our users, and all of our users are there. All right, so we could try to create a user. Take that. I'm sorry, my wheel of my chair is touching my podium. All right. Let's see. So if we go to a post of users, we might be able to go and create something. So we can do that. So let's just go into our index.html and let's try it and see if we can get it to actually work. So I'm going to do this a little bit crazily. Do we want to do it that way? We'll just post it and see what happens. Form action / users method equals post. And it's going to have an input type. Text is fine. Value or name equals name. And another input of submit. And value equals value. Cool. All right, so we have this form. It's going to go to users. It's going to go to users as a post. When it posts, hopefully it will pass over a name and then do something. All right, so off we go. Here's our form. Mike, hit it. All right, so that's what it responded with. It responded with a new user because remember we told it to respond with a user. Right, so let's just look at what happened there. So we said, okay, here's our server. Our server starts here. We have these routes loaded as part of Git. It goes to these routes. It hits as a post, users, so then it runs the users create from the controller. In the users create, it says, okay, I'm going to go and do this stuff. Okay, we created this new user, blah, blah, blah. Tried to save it. If there was an error, it would have thrown this thing. So it looks like it successfully saved and responded with our user. All right, so now if we went back to our just /users route, we should be able to see a new user in that returned object. So let's just check that and see if that's actually the case. So now as a Git, so that was a post before, and there's the Git, which has our one user in it. All right, let's make another user just to clarify that. All right, so now I create another user called Aaron. Now the Git version, we should have two users in here. So there's one user, and there's our second user. So user 1 or user 2 and 1.
So you're just having on the in the post it log the one user, but when you get to the get users,
Yeah,
all of
exactly. That's the Get is my index method.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why you're not redirecting.
Correct for now. Yeah. Cool. All right, so what we're eventually going to do is we're going to hook that up to Angular. And Angular, when it gets responses back, is going to decide what it's going to do. You're going to use the location service to be like, well, I want to redirect this time, or I don't want to redirect, or I want to do something else. All right, cool. All right, so there's our server. So I think our server's pretty much up and running. Let's go ahead and do some front-end stuff. This is where I'm going to really mess things up, so please help me out when you guys can. So let's close all these things. So we're done with this. I don't want to touch this for a while. So I'm going to be like, okay, get rid of all this garbage. Because again, the idea behind this is a standalone piece. Like this server is just the server. It doesn't matter what's going on the client side. The client can just hit stuff.
Question on
Yeah.
on data validation.
Yep.
How much would you add at this point on the server side and the users? Sorry,
So we added a couple things, right?
On the client side.
Yeah, so we added, I guess our max length didn't quite fire correctly. Yeah. Yeah. I think I said max length instead of min length potentially. So those validations should have been firing. Let me just check to see what that user model looks like. Yeah, I said min length should have fired, but we can figure that out later. I would, what's that?
I don't know. Is there supposed to be an underscore?
Probably not. I probably screwed something up. Yeah. We can always look that up again. But these guys should fire. These validators should be firing already. At this point, I would probably not do too much validation to just get my stuff up and running, and then I'd come back and do the validations on the model. But you could do it all now if you wanted to. You could do like,
But eventually, that is the right place to put
yes,
a whole ton of validations.
Yep. Yeah. So user.schema .pre save do something. Oops. Run validators. And there's other ways to run validators, but that'd be one variant of it. So you could. There's also like obviously, I think it's validators here, and then it's a list, I believe, of different things you can pass in with functions that return true and false. So like function. This is a validator, and it takes data, and if data do something. I think that would be a validator for just presence or absence of data. So, and you just basically like, hey, this validator, and I might have screwed things up because, as I said, it's been a while, but it'd be something to that effect.
All validation should be on the server because people can manipulate your client side.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you'll have both, which is kind of this new standard. So you basically be like, okay, well, I'm going to make sure from the front end, just kind of because it's easy to give a quick response from the front end, but you definitely want to make sure, regardless, that you have a check on the back end, whether or not you send a response back to the user or not. Because if somebody's trying to manipulate it, they're not getting a response anyways, or they don't care because they, in theory, know what they're doing, or they've totally screwed themselves up and are manipulating things when they're not trying to, which is also not ideal. But if they're that screwed up, then they don't care what the response is either. So. So I'm going to undo all those because I think it's going to break. but I would, in general, if I'm just building something to kind of get things bootstrapped together, I would not put my validations in until I kind of have a clearer plan as to what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that things are kind of, all the pieces are fitting together, and then I'm going to go out and do the validations.
That's something I was wondering on the Angular side of things. I was remembering how Ruby or Rails posted an authenticity token.
Mhm.
for it.
Yep. You can
Scripting and all, is there maybe an equivalent to that?
You can set one up, but it's not part of Express by default. And so basically what an authenticity token, for those of you who haven't experienced them, it's basically a way to say, hey, this form was created by this server, and then the server's listening for it and saying, yep, that's a legitimate form. So if somebody tries to create a form dynamically and push it onto your site, it won't be holding onto that key unless they've actually rewritten the key and make sure it's matching. But that thing gets hidden, and so it's really hard to make the match unless you know something else about the server, which you shouldn't know. So, So, and again, this is kind of, I think I've told those of you I've taught before, but the kind of the idea behind web security and just security in general is pretty much everything is breakable. Any site is hackable, no matter how good the security is on it. But basically what you're trying to do is you're basically trying to narrow down the field of how many people can actually do it. And so you figure there's some sort of relationship between how many people are actually malicious and will try to hack a site versus how popular your site is. So if you have a really low popularity site, like if you're just sharing it with your family, like unless you have my family, in which case there's a few malicious people in there, they won't, you can be pretty safe that nobody's going to try to hack your site. But then if, you have Pokemon Go, it's already been hacked twice, I think. So, so you have millions of users, even if they have reasonably good security on there, of those millions, you figure one or two of them are both talented enough and malicious that they can do it. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the gist is the more protections you can put on, the better, but don't ever think your stuff is secure. Cool. All right. All right, off to the client side. All right, so I was originally going to just write some JavaScript and do a HTTP request and basically return with a jQuery response, but let's just go with after the Angular side. So let's see here. Oh man, all my snippets are all busted. Yeah, there we go. All right. So basically, I'm just saying go and get a couple of Angular things. So we're gonna go get Angular JS and Angular routes. So Angular route is a little bit antiquated now, even though we use it in the platform. There are other ways to basically go and get partials, which work a little bit better. Sorry, I'm totally lying to you. Never mind. Angular route's fine.
So it's not antiquated?
Not as much as I was thinking. So the ng view strategy, just people aren't using it as much. So basically, because you can only kind of put one view at a time into an individual module. And so there are some other ways to do it, which I don't remember how to do them right now, unfortunately. But it behaves very similarly, but not exactly the same way. So, all right. So what sorts of script sources do we need? Oops. So, well, let's just go into client and say, well, we're going to use some sort of app that we're going to make from Angular, right? So let's just go ahead and make that. So I'm going to just put the pathing to it for now. So let's call this thing app.js. So we're going to make that thing just top level. So we'll have it in client. Well, let's put it in JS/app.js. So new file, JS/ whoa, that was not what I want to do. All right, so now we have this new file in here, app.js, that's inside of our JS folder. All right, so there's our Angular module. We don't need ng cookies. We're having Angular route in there. And I often just put the configuration with it right now. So all right, so basically, since we haven't, if we put a semicolon here, then that ends that sentence, right? And then we have to do something like app.config. But Angular, you can just concatenate them all together if you wanted to. So I'm just concatenating config on here. So we're basically saying go get route provider. When we go to / we can load a template URL. And this is just an AJAX call to a folder called partials that's going to be found in our static folder somewhere. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's just make a view1.html. So inside of client, new file, and it's going to be in partials/view1.html.
Substantial routes, you actually have a routes JS.
Potentially, if it was like, because app is so minimal a lot of times, I'll just have all my routes right there. Because, you might have 10 routes, but that's still only, you'd have this line plus 10 other lines. So, and sometimes I'll put my filters and stuff in this file as well, depending on how complicated things get. So, but for smaller projects, I just put it all together. Eventually, you could have them broken all out however you want. So you could display, well, I want all my configuration folders into a JS config thing that you go and get right afterwards. All right, so there's that. Cool. Let's not have a controller for now. Yeah, well, now it's fine. All right.
When Chris was explaining the intro to Angular,
Uh-huh.
he's talking about how it's highly configurable
Yes.
structure.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that this is where it happens, where you just like, yeah, I want routes.js, but as long as I declare whatever structure, folder structure, as long as I'm when I'm in my index HTML, I have all that in the proper order in scripts.
Yep.
Declarations. Then
It shouldn't matter. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you could organize this however you want. So some people would make this thing into an Angular folder and be like, oh, I want all my Angular stuff in here versus just all my JavaScript stuff in here. And to kind of even help you out further, I mean, obviously you can console log at the top of these things like loaded Angular module and watch the load patterns as well, which can be rather helpful sometimes. All right. So we go to partials, load that view. All right. So in here, how do I actually make my HTML actually have access and use Angular?
the top of your app, your app,
What did I name it? I don't know, since I just copied and pasted code. Just app. Okay. All right. So there's that part. Where, if we were going to have our view show up, where would we have that happen?
you need another container in your body.
Cool.
ng view is a directive, and you add view.
Yeah, I think that should be enough. And save this guy. We don't need all this other stuff, right? We just need a partial. So don't need any header information. We just need a very minimal partial, a div. We don't need hello world. We already have our hello world. All right. So this is a partial. All right. So I have an error of next tick error. I probably tried to run my server somewhere weird, but it looks like it's okay now. All right, so let's go and see what happens. Oh, so let's inspect element and see if we have broke anything. All right, so something didn't get loaded correctly. So the Angular module looks like it loaded, but our Bower components didn't quite load. So it's probably just me typing Bower components versus Bower component or something silly like that. But let's just check. So that's an easy check to figure out. So Bower component. So that looks fine. Here's Angular, AngularJS. So that should be okay.
Link to route.
So let's look at our server.js first and see. So /Bower components.
So now you no longer need Bower components because that's being served up at the root level.
Oh, yes, thank you. Cool. So what I want to do is get rid of these two guys. That's usually what I do. There we go. I just don't like all my Bower components to show up on my source, so thanks. Cool. All right, there we go. So there's our partial. And now you can do, at this point, you can do all your Angular stuff as normal. So I think that's kind of where I wanted to stop this. So, obviously you could write your services, you could write your factories, modularize those, or have them in your module. However, if it's a small project, sometimes it's easier just to have them all in one folder. Bigger projects, definitely modularize them. So. Quick question for you guys: how many times does a factory load
One time.
once. So one of the cool things about factories is that they're singletons. Once they're loaded, they should be, whenever you reference them, they shouldn't reload, which is super useful to store information, and that's one of the reasons that they're used the way they are. Versus a controller, every time you load the page, what happens to that controller? Yep, it reloads itself. So it creates a whole new object every time. It cleans that object up, dumps it, and then makes a new one. So awesome. Cool. Hopefully that was helpful. If not, I'm sorry.